Connectivity Conference. We have had 4 plenary sessions so far and 6 parallel tracks so far where we have had good deliberations. Uh, now, before I invite speakers onto the dais, I have an announcement to make. We are using an application called Slido, which is an audience interaction platform. Please log on to sli.do and join hashtag RCC 2018 to post your questions to the panelists. With this, may I now request the panelists to come on stage. First, I invite onto the stage Mr. Kerry Reeves, who's the Deputy Director, Office of Environment and Economic Growth, USAID, Bangladesh. We have Mr. Nirjan Rai, who is the Executive Director of Policy Entrepreneurs INC. We have Mr. Harsha Wickramasinghe, who is Deputy Director General, Demand Side Management, Sri Lanka Sustainable Energy Authority, and Ms. Sharmila Barathan, who is Senior Vice President Corporate Affairs and Policy, General Electric, and Mr. Mudassir Moin, Managing Director, Rahimafrooz, Bangladesh. We welcome all of you onto the stage. Now I request Mr. Reeves to moderate the session and carry on with the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming to the very last session on the final day of the conference. I know it can be a lot of work, so I appreciate you all enduring to the very end to come and join us. In the last session, I was in the same room, and we guilted everyone to move towards the front, and it actually had a good energy. So, come on in like we're family, crowded guests with really broad experience, with government experience, private sector experience, work with international development, work with civil society and research. So I'm really excited to hear what they have to say about the subject matter. Just one quick correction. We do have a little bit of a different title. Sharmila is actually the President for Government Affairs and Policy for General Electric. So I just wanted to make sure that was right. The way we've been handling most of the parallel sessions is that each of the speakers takes 5 to 8 minutes. They talk a little bit about the subject matter, their expertise, what's going on in their part of the world, the opportunities and limitations. And after that, we'll take questions. As Barathan mentioned, Slido works pretty well, so if you feel more comfortable using technology to submit your questions, you can do that online. If you want to do it the old-fashioned way, you can just raise your hand and I'll call on you. Just so everyone knows, I used to teach middle school, and I've also taught in college, so if no one asks questions, I will call on you. I'm not afraid to do that, and I know some of your names. So just to get us started, maybe we could start at far right. Sharmila, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure, thank you. So firstly, I'd like to congratulate the organizers for the rich discussion that they've managed to have in the last couple of days, and I'm aware of it because the GE team has been here for the last day and a half, and I did get feedback. So congratulations, very nice work, I think. Now, as I, in my career as head of corporate affairs for GE South Asia, as I travel around India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Nepal, what I've seen is that regional economic cooperation holds potential for considerable gains in growth and to secure the energy future for the region. And I think what's important, and I'm going to just hit the highlights. I think what's important is to harness the complementarities, capitalize the opportunities, and leverage the best practices. And most importantly, I mean, since I'm a private sector person, this is the way I would think, which is leverage the economies of scale from the investments that have made, thereby leading to cost-effective electricity generation, and most importantly for this session, renewable energy power generation. Now, GE has been here in India since 1902 and has made significant investments. For example, a couple of things that I'd like to highlight is we've invested 220 million in an R&D center, which is based in Bangalore, which does cutting-edge technology research. This is the largest R&D center that we have around the world outside of the United States, and they cater to 120 countries. Now, similarly, we've made another 220 million of investments in a multimodal manufacturing facility in Pune. Again, top of the line, completely digitized, has no paper and things like that. And most importantly, I think what matters is the fact the precision is that of aviation standard. Having made all of these investments, it is only natural for us to be able to, one, produce, innovate, and produce top of state-of-the-art technology. And I'll take an example of what's happening in the wind sector. India is one of the leaders in the adoption and execution of renewable energy products. And we have a big play in the wind market. What is it that's helped us here to participate as a big player has been we've been riding on technology innovation, on new business models, and thirdly, cost competitiveness. Now, having been able to achieve that, which is, for example, the design and prototype would come out of the R&D center, and then the commercial teams here, which are fairly large, would work on new business models and find out what's the best way to be cost competitive here. Having done all of this, it would only make sense for the region to be able to leverage technology similar to GE that's coming out of here only because investments have made and there is significant gain from the economies of scale. The second important thing I think is also about, what we've also experienced in the region has been that it doesn't matter whether you're a small or a big country. What is more important is about your ability to adopt disruptive technology. And I'll give you the example, and I'm going to draw on an example from the conventional power sector that the renewables can draw on. For example, we are a significant player in Bangladesh for gas-based power generation. And our most recent product, it's called the H gas turbine, which has a 62.5% efficiency. The first market that's adopting is Bangladesh. And typically one would think that a smaller country would not have the ability to draw on, but having said that, but that's not really the case. And I think that's not really the case. And so my final conclusion is, what is it that actually, what is it that draws companies to the private sector to such markets is essentially an enabling policy framework. Even today, as I go around the countries advocating for some policy reforms, there are two examples that I'd like to give. One is that, for example, there are wind turbine tenders that come out in the region which clearly say I need manufacturing experience of X number of years. It doesn't matter. For example, if it's coming out of a facility like ours, which is to the precision standard of aviation, what matters is the performance. Ask for performance guarantees, ask for something else, whatever that matters. But I think it's important for the region to be able to leverage economies of scale and to be able to provide their citizens a cost-effective power scenario. The second thing is also some of them actually preclude, so for example, in the transmission and distribution sector, there are tenders that come out which actually preclude products from India. They would rather have it, and the ones which are approved, as they call it, they're on the list, are those which are from Europe, and because of which cost goes up. Now, it's fine, it doesn't preclude GE from playing. We're happy to play. We can send it from Europe or we can send it from India. But I think it's in the interest of the country to review some of these and create an enabling framework. Those were the highlights of my points. Thanks.
Thank you, Sharmila. We were talking earlier, Sharmila and I, and the discussions yesterday, we talked a lot about some of the limitations to connectivity, limitations to innovation and development. I'm kind of excited that we're ending today talking about something that is positive and looking very forward, looking at opportunities for growth and development. I think that's a great way to end a two-day session. I appreciate Sharmila's introductions and information. Moin, if you don't mind going next, and if you prefer, you can speak from the pulpit, or you can speak from the chair.
I think I prefer.
All right.
It's easier to. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I am Mudassir Moin. I am from Rahimafrooz, Bangladesh. There's a lot happening in Bangladesh with renewable energies. I thought, let me share a bit. The government has a plan to ensure energy for all citizens by 2021. So that is the driving force under the current government headed by Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, that a national vision to ensure energy for all citizens. You'll be happy to know that Bangladesh has the largest solar home systems rollout all over the world. It is over 4.5 million installed already. So solar installations means solar PV, and then you have the pumping systems, you have the mini grids, the solar rooftops, and solar powered BTS. These are the components. So at this and there is a goal to use 5% of the total electricity generation of solar by 2015. So these are the broader aspects through which the government is moving. So it is one of the catalysts for improving the socio-economic conditions of rural Bangladesh, ensuring long-term energy and security. So when we say renewable energy, there are a few components. The solar is one, then we have hydro, we have wind, and we have biogas and biomass. Solar is almost 50% of the renewable energy component we have today, and it is still by far the largest. And our access to electricity is 74% of the population, and 12% is from the renewable energy at this moment. And the moving forward game is to increase the use of renewable energy, and the government and the private sector. It's a partnership between the government and private sector to succeed in this endeavor. So the policy is a two proposed strategy: business type involving contribution from beneficiaries and private sector, and social service type aiming to implement government social commitment. That is in a nutshell where Bangladesh is moving, and I would expect any questions and queries later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Moin. That's very interesting to hear, and maybe I can call up next Harsha, our representative from Sri Lanka. Would you like to go next?
Thank you, Kerry, and thank you, Cuts, and the organizers for this wonderful opportunity given to us to come and share our experience. So the topic of our discussion is about opportunity in renewable energy. So let me say a few words of how we perceived renewable energy about 10-15 years ago. So we think it's a very democratic resource, unlike oil or coal, where the resources are concentrated in few countries. So if you take renewable energy, it's spread all over the world. So essentially, no geographic region or a country can exert influence over other countries. So that democracy is well taken, and as a result, we can look forward to renewable energy being the source of energy of the future, because it's all over, and most of the time it's available. And I foresee a future where electricity is going to be the major energy carrier, replacing the fossil fuel sources like liquid diesel and gasoline and things like that. It will get replaced in about 20-30 years, even in the transport sector and other sectors. So renewable energy is going to be a booming sector. And but compared to conventional sources of energy, this has another very important attribute, that is its ability to engage people of the users and the areas where it is occurring. There's potential to engage large number of people. So I must tell you a little bit of background of, about my country's achievements, Sri Lanka. So we have a population of about 20 million, all of whom are getting grid electricity, 100% electrified, and no power shortages, 24/7, the government is providing electricity. So, but a little while ago, about 10 years ago, we had about 136,000 rural households connected through solar means. And because the rapid expansion of the national grid, all these 136,000 connections became obsolete almost overnight. So that was such a rapid paced development. But my story today is about renewable energy. And 2005, we were given a task of reaching 10% of our generation from new renewable energy sources, that is excluding hydropower. And we were able to achieve the target 1 year ahead of time in 2015. And now our country is steadily growing that share of 10% from non-conventional renewable energy sources. And we did very little minute things to make this happen. That is the promise of renewable energy. We just managed to provide investment security to the private sector and other investors. And they came in their numbers, and there was a big clamor to invest in renewable energy. So after a while, about 5-10 years later, we managed to evolve that sector into guarantee the investment efficiency as well, meaning we went the competitive bidding line, and as a result, we have secured one of the cheapest wind energy projects in the region. We got 4.84 US cents per kilowatt hour for a 100 megawatt wind project, and the construction is ready to begin any moment now. So that this evolution has taught us many beautiful experiences which we can share with the region. So it's about doing very few things right at the right time to get the renewable energy agenda to move your country forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Harsha. It's good to hear about all the successes in Sri Lanka. Nirjan, would you like to go next?
Sure. I guess I don't have an option. Okay, so I asked Kerry that I should go last because the status of renewable energy in Nepal is actually quite low. And I say that particularly because I'm counting medium and large hydro not within the gambit of renewable energy and focusing more on solar and wind. Small hydro definitely, but the focus that I want to put today is on solar in respect to solar and wind. The installed capacity in Nepal is actually less than a megawatt of solar right now on grid. There's a 25 megawatt project that is being in the works right now, which should be online in the next 2-3 years. The procurement issue has actually delayed it quite a bit. The reason why we have solar was usually as a alternate source when we had a lot of power outages until about last year when we started importing half of our consumption of peak demand during peak demand from India right now, and so only 50% is produced in Nepal. And most of this is actually through coal-fired power plants. And so it's kind of like a problem that, we talk about Nepal having a lot of hydropower, but we're actually importing quite a bit from India. When I was asked if I would be interested in being part of this panel, I wasn't really sure how to engage because I'm not a RE person. I usually work in electricity market, Nepal's electricity sector. And so I thought the way that, and given the fact that we don't have a lot of RE, I thought I would like to structure within the larger connectivity issue, and particularly India's investment in renewables and how that actually impacts Nepal's own narrative on hydropower development. So when we were growing up, this was this narrative. We were told that Nepal has 80-something thousand megawatts of hydropower potential. We are the second richest country in terms of water resources. That was one thing we were always instilled as kids. The other one was we are a yam between two rocks, so India and China, and so we were the little yam, and so it is very difficult to grow. So talking in terms of connectivity, the second story is that kind of changed because these days we talk about Nepal being more of a bridge or trying to become that bridge between the two countries. And so that is one narrative that has changed. The one that hasn't changed is the hydropower narrative, which is we have a lot of resources, we will exploit these resources, and we will be wealthy as a nation. And the assumption in there is a ready-made market in India. And so the connectivity was already kind of instilled in that without really understanding the electricity market of India. And maybe there was a window of opportunity if we had done it about 20, 30 years ago. Then maybe there wasn't enough. India was then an energy-hungry country, but today it is a net exporter, and so we're exporting. And given the fact that RE technology and the price has gone down in terms of how much it costs, hydropower in Nepal is actually quite expensive. And so all of a sudden, we have to actually now start facing this problem of where are we going to sell that hydropower. And also in terms of just how building hydropower, the social cost is so high that there are a lot of social concerns within developing it in Nepal. And so, and still though, politically we have not been able to change the narrative of let's do something else. And I think something like this, when we have a platform like this to discuss, is to also start thinking for Nepal, and Nepal should also start rethinking its hydropower narrative in terms of how it fits. One is in terms of the peaking load that India will have to rely on because of its investment in renewables, and how Nepal can actually synchronize with that and start investing in actually large hydros. I know I said, we should not build a lot of hydros, but for energy security purpose in Nepal, as well as to maximize its hydropower potential, it has to actually now start thinking of peaking and get a better return than rather than just trying to think that India is a ready-made market. The other is in terms of Nepal should actually should start thinking about energy mix in its own energy source, so that now start thinking about putting solar particularly. There's very little potential for wind in Nepal, but solar there is we say about 3 to 4,000 megawatt right now. And so Nepal needs to start thinking about that, and also importing from India the renewable energy, and less as India decreases its reliance on coal. So that connectivity will actually help in terms of working within the region of how India's push towards renewables and other countries push towards renewables, and how Nepal, and I would say even Bhutan would fall into this category, although I haven't read much on Bhutan. But this is kind of like where I think the opportunity for Nepal actually comes about. But there are, as we've discussed yesterday, there are major barriers. The one that often comes to moving into this direction is, will Nepal actually be able to get into the Indian market is trust deficit. The agreements we've had between the two countries, for example, there was the Ministry of Power of India came with guidelines that actually restricted, or allegedly restricting Chinese investments or non-Indian / Nepali investors to invest in Nepal's hydropower or energy market in Nepal. And there's also the preference of India to prefer bilateral, working in bilateral arrangements rather than regional. So when Bangladesh wants to import from Nepal, we do not actually have an arrangement where we can actually sell, and India prefers to work with Nepal separately and then with Bangladesh separately, and so that is a major hurdle for us. And the last thing is issue of national security. We're talking about interdependence and connectivity, whereas that makes sense in terms of all the economic benefits we can get, but it also can be seen as a political threat in terms of national security. And so as we're talking about how we create interdependence, there's this issue of where national security, concerns of national security actually stops us from moving anywhere forward. We were talking about political will earlier in this room, and I think sometimes it's about these large issues on security and national security that kind of just stops all this discussion when to get that political will to get that interdependence. I'll stop for now, and then I'll take other questions later. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. So we've talked a bit in other sessions about sort of the challenges and opportunities, as I mentioned. South Asia is a quarter of the world's population. You have a number of countries that are growing at 7% per year. You have 400 million people that are not connected to energy at all right now, and have no access to electricity. Many of those, however, are young people, and there's a huge young population in this region as well, who may have different expectations for development and rate of development. So I was wondering, as a large private sector representative, where does the private sector see the greatest opportunities for renewable energy development in the region, or do you see them? Sharmila?
So in terms of, so we operate, so to be clear what our portfolio is. Our portfolio in the thermal is gas, steam. Our portfolio in thermal is basically gas, steam, and we also operate in transmission distribution. Now specifically in the renewables, we operate in two areas. One is wind and one is hydro. We don't do solar, because of which I want to be sensitive about talking about solar. So having said what's our portfolio, let me say then where do we play in terms of access to electricity for a vast majority of the population. I think our contribution lies essentially in transmission and distribution. And again, I want to remain sensitive to the request, don't be technical. So staying non-technical, we do the National Load Center for the country has GE technology. We're very sensitive to making sure that we are part of this whole group of stakeholders, ensuring that there is reliable power to citizens of this country. So that's on the grid portfolio. Much of the work that we do in renewable generation, especially wind, I can't claim that is towards access to electricity. But having said that, I think the smaller hydro projects, clearly, especially in areas which are remote, I think that is where, again, we contribute. Now, besides which, I think what we do at a much larger scale is essentially capacity building, only so that the energy sector as a whole is prepared to deal with the future of energy roadmap for the country.
For Moin, I have one for you. All right. What are the key challenges facing public-private partnerships, especially in Bangladesh?
I think the key challenge is still the availability of land, where the move is going towards the megawatt projects. The availability of land is becoming a challenge because there is a vast agricultural land which actually you can't use for this purpose. So the first challenge is I'll say is the land for the megawatt projects. Thank you.
What about for smaller projects?
For smaller projects, I think today the issue is funding, because the purchasing power is still not at the right level. You know that the entire renewable energy or the solar sector has been in the subsidy mode for many, many years. So that is, we need, when we are saying public-private partnership, we are saying that increased investment needs to be required in this sector to make it affordable for everyone. Thank you.
Access to finance is always
Access
a challenge.
Yeah.
Great. Do we have any questions from the audience? Please.
I'm from Sri Lanka, Admiral Colambage. My question is, I was wondering why no one is talking about the possibility of ocean energy, energy from the ocean. I personally feel that in the future, when the demand for renewable energy grows, even the hydro may not be sufficient. Of course, solar is a huge potential. Are we not, in this region, I will direct it to the panel, are we not even thinking of deriving energy from the ocean in the future?
I won't start with our landlocked part. Anyone? General Electric? Give me thoughts.
So let me answer it in two ways. Are we looking at it from a commercially viable perspective? At the end of the day, the only thing that the region has made it very clear that what matters is cost of electricity. So if you see where wind has gone, it has actually, what people have strived towards is to make it on parity with fossil fuel. So, and any newer technologies, and if you look at offshore, and I'm talking of technologies that the broader audience here will be familiar with, if you look at offshore, you will see that the tariff is about 10 times that. And if you're looking at new futuristic technologies, you're going to be looking at tariffs which is far. So I think, while I think the R&D, and I'm speaking for the broader community, I think the research community will only be too happy to look at futuristic technologies. But I think that will be limited by what is it that they are going to be able to produce that's commercially viable, number one. And secondly, there is no citizen who's going to say, I'm willing to buy ocean thing at 20 rupees per kilowatt hour. Yeah. So, so I think the answer to you is that I think on behalf of the research group, I would think that this would be of interest to them, clearly. But I think what is most important realistically is to say, is that a technology that's going to be on par with some of the commercially viable technologies today? Thank you.
Sri Lanka? You have a lot of ocean access.
Yes, in fact, I agree with Sharmila there because we have so much other resources, well-developed technologies, everything, and there's a lot of hard work involved in developing a resource to commercial realization. To start with, our wind energy measurement program is nearly 14 years old now. We realize the benefits of wind only after about 10 years of hard work, a lot of background work you have to do, but not for solar. Solar overtook us. The industry was speedier than the government setup. So, but even to take measurements of the available ocean power, wave power, and tidal energy and all that, it takes a lot of funding and effort. But we have not deterred by that. We have received some assistance from Finland and even some other countries, and we are trying to develop some capacity in the country in that respect. But I must add, the wave activity and the ocean energy is far superior in the polar regions than in the tropical parts of the globe because of the shape of the earth. There's nothing much we can do, but that has not stopped us from looking at it.
Any other questions? Oh.
And I have Harsha's approval on this question. So what's the political outlook for Sri Lanka, Harsha?
Actually, I come from the government setup, so I hope this will not cost my employment. But we have undergone so much turmoil in terms of politics, and gradually we have become a middle-income country, and we are beginning to look a bit more developed country than rest of the countries in the region, and we are far less involved in the politics than we were 10 years ago. So we develop in spite of the government, so not because of the government. The country has understood that, so whatever turmoil that is going on there, we are not bothered. There will be a different boss tomorrow when I reach office, probably, but it doesn't affect us. Our programs go ahead. So politics, we are beginning to live with it. So we develop in spite of governments, we develop.
I think there are many of us that work in government that can understand. There's a couple questions. So let's go. I saw a question in the back first.
Thank you, Shantanu Mukherjee. I'm a lawyer as well as I work on policy issues. The question is that we see quite often the mainstream grid connectivity with rural areas, remote rural areas, there's a gap. It doesn't happen quite a lot. In such a scenario, when we are talking about connectivity, have you looked into microhydro? Because microhydro is, of course, there's very advanced technologies also there, generic technologies also there. Have you looked into microhydro? I understand that in Valara, Idukku, in Kerala, it is being looked into and it is being worked. To what extent, I don't know. Experts sitting there, have you looked into microhydro as an option? This particular example that I'm saying, there are around a tribal area of around 100 to 150 families and have been absolutely out of connectivity, electric reach from the mainstream grid. But the microhydro is helping for their sufficient needs. Have you looked into that? Thank you.
Nepal has significant microhydro initiatives. My organization, we are focused more on on-grid, but I'll speak to some things about it. There are some really successful cases of microhydro in Nepal. Communities have been able to have access to electricity that increases their efficiency, just in terms of creating better livelihood, doing other like milling, so on and so forth. However, what we've also seen is that the problem with microhydro is demand is very low. Most of these places don't have significant economic activities, and so the requirement is so low that these usually fall into disrepair quite early on, because it's very minimum lighting, two bulbs, a small TV, and pretty much that is about it. Where the communities have been able to increase economic activities, they've done it very well. Others have just gone to waste. A lot of the micro hydro in Nepal have been mostly focused, most been pushed by development sector, and they have not been sustainable. Although I'm sure there will be other people who would disagree, but at least speaking from somebody who works more on grid, we realize that people actually like being on grid for the just the fact that there is very regular electricity all day. A microhydro, you have to either shut it down during the day and night when there is no demand. So there are problems around it, but there are many successful stories as well.
I would like to reiterate what Nirjan just told you, but I had a very good experience nearly 2 decades ago. I personally am a microhydro enthusiast, and with my efforts, I have been able to provide electricity to about 300 families in my country. But similar to what he told you, it is the perfect solution for a very remote community as long as there's nothing close by in the national grid. If there is even a rumor or a political statement saying the electricity is coming to the village next to you, trouble starts. The community-owned and community-managed places like that, they are very sensitive to this kind of external stimuli, and as a result, there's a lot of unsettled bills to be paid, and many things crop up, and as a result, the societies collapse. But on the same lines, we have a couple of inhabited islands up north where electricity is provided by diesel generators, and by the utility, no community involvement whatsoever. It's just the national grid similar quality, and the generators are operated by the main utility. So less people involvement, less trouble. But I'm saying this in a forum, maybe people who are very romantic about community-owned apparatus, but my bitter lessons from Sri Lanka is community-owned enterprises like this, they work as long as there's harmony in that community. The moment you have something usually related to payments and funds, these entities suffer irreparable damages. So thereafter, it's very difficult to start it up from where it stopped. So we have to keep that in mind when providing solutions. But as long as you are sure that near the last 100 kilometer there is no national grid, you can very well enjoy the microhydro electricity. Thank you.
Question in the middle.
Also have a question for our colleague Nirjan, and apologies if this is a too Nepal-specific question, but I very much appreciated your comments, your remarks about the need that Nepal has to update or change its narrative on power. And if I understood you correctly, to say that that narrative needs to change to include pursuing both large hydropower projects that would maximize return on investment, as well as diversifying the mix of power to include solar power development. So let me ask you a somewhat pointed question. Are you feeling optimistic, given the political landscape in Nepal currently? Are you optimistic that now is the time to be able to successfully change that narrative? Or do you have another view? Thank you.
I think it'll be difficult to change the narrative, because it's been instilled within every Nepali that this is the resource we have, the only resource we have, and that we will, like I said earlier, will be wealthier. It's also gotten to a point where actually every Nepali actually starts to feel that today. And so it'll be difficult to change, but if we don't realize electricity as only a means to something else, rather than just selling it as a commodity, but rather using it as a means for industrialization, or just in terms of getting better electricity for lights to light your home, your hospitals, your schools. If that isn't the narrative where we will develop through hydropower, not as selling it, by not seeking rent through it, but rather using it for something else, then our path of growth will be limited. I don't think it'll be an easy sell for Nepal to change its narrative, but it's, I think, forums like not just here, but also in Nepal, this is the narrative that as people working in the sector, we've been trying to push through. I don't know if it'll change though, because it's so ingrained within the Nepali psyche right now. I hope I answered, but I can try to explain it further. There was. Can I try to answer another question here, which I saw on Slido? Nepal has a love-hate relationship with India's energy companies. Can RE investment lead to collaboration? This actually, I'll tie it to this trust deficit argument that has been made through and through in most of the panels. And also the question that, and I'll try to be more positive, because one of the questions that we were given was also, what are the roles of local and external policymakers, private players and CSOs in developing renewable energy industry in South Asia? The relationship between Nepal and India, I don't think it's just in terms of the energy companies. It's actually just Nepal and India, or at least from the Nepal side, is a love-hate relationship between the two. And we work a lot on water resources as well. And so the three treaties we have with India on Koshi, Gandak, which were done back in 1950s, 60s, and then Mahakali in the 1990s, Nepalis feel that we always got the short end of it. And the public, the water experts, the intellectuals all believe that India kind of pushed its particular agenda to get whatever it wanted, and Nepal has always felt the short end of it. And so this also bears in the sense that I would assume it's in the region. One of the reasons why there is this lack of connectivity is because of this kind of sentiment between India and its neighbors, right? And so I don't know how that's going to change. It's a difficult thing, but I think connecting markets, whether it's RE or other areas between the neighboring countries, is one way to start creating that interdependence that eventually might overcome the political threat that is out there. And so I think platforms like these, where civil society or other stakeholders, private sector, can come and have a very frank discussion about what those interconnectivities can be, is actually the starting point. And so I really like platforms like this, where we get to kind of go past that government-to-government discussion where there are protocols and larger national security interests, and it allows kind of space to have this kind of discussion. So I really appreciate Csos and East-West Center, FICCI, the US government kind of putting this kind of panel for the region, and I hope something good will come out of it.
So to add to what he said, on a positive note, we as GE are neutral where we work. We love markets, and we don't get caught up in such things. So one of the things that I wanted to mention was that we work extensively in hydro in Nepal. And we acquired a company which is called Alstom Power and Grid globally, and they have had a presence in Nepal for many years, and we as GE continue to operate in that market. But I have a question for you, which is, what's been the experience working with China, and would that narrative sort of be different from what you said? That, I mean, I don't know enough. So when I've met with, I'll tell you, for example, Mr. Gimbre or someone, I haven't heard what you've said, that, you felt that, you've heard around these conversations that Nepal got the short end of it. I didn't hear it, but having said that, I'm glad to hear it, because at least it makes me more aware. Having said that, what's been the experience working with China?
Well, Nepal's kind of tried to play the China card for a long time, vis-a-vis India. And going back to the 60s, and in some ways, this is always how the Nepali identity was established. Recently, it was 2015-16 when there was the economic blockade, or the allegedly economic blockade from the Indian side. Nepal did reach out. The current prime minister, was prime minister back then, also did reach out. And so we do see and China kind of opening up to Nepal's interest to engage. In terms of investment itself, they've been there for quite a bit. This is even before this political change, investing in hydropower. We have Sino Hydro investing in 2 projects right now and increasing more. The large projects are also there are interest from China. Having said that, though, I think it's difficult to read too much into what China really wants in Nepal politically. They are investing as just investors rather than playing the geopolitics. I'm sure there is some aspect of geopolitics also, but it's not to the point where the way that, at least in Nepal, movement toward China. We did sign some access to port through China, but just in terms of energy, electricity, it's a difficult market for us to reach into. It kind of plays along that China card in a very different way. But let's see how it goes. I mean, China has, there is some commitment to build railroads into Kathmandu, down to Lumbini, but it's still a long ways. It's very difficult to answer that.
Cheyenne? Oh.
All right, actually posted this question in Slido, but I'll just speak now. It's a question to Sharmila and Harsha. I think you have seen from first-hand experience about the success of renewable energies in different markets, and my question would be, I understand that the answer to that question will not be specific. But from your experience, if we, I work for USAID Bangladesh, so Bangladesh is actually at the verge of creating a new wind energy market in Bangladesh. So hearing from your experience, what are the top 2-3 considerations that you think as a sector the Bangladesh government, like I'm talking about Harsha, who has been in the government side of Sri Lanka, and Sharmila, who has been the private sector participant in various markets, including Sri Lanka and also in Bangladesh. So what do you think are the 2-3 first steps that as a new market Bangladesh should consider?
Yes, thank you for the question. We have gone through many things, so I hope this will add value. Firstly, it takes very little bit of government intention to change things. So if we take the renewable energy industry in our country, the entire industry grew on a simple single document titled the Standardized Power Purchase Agreement. So a benchmark price was given. It was resource neutral, so hydro, solar, whatever, if you can come at that price, which was the avoided cost of electricity at the time, so you were given a license up to 10 megawatts to develop a project. So at the time, in late 90s, only hydropower was feasible at the time, but later on, it evolved into a mix of wind energy, solar energy, everything, with the prices coming down in the international market. So that kind of strong agreement, acceptable to the financing community, and the willingness of the private sector to do business with the government entity, which is the Ceylon Electricity Board, the utility company. So that created the necessary environment. But the most important thing is we were able to maintain this setup during the last 2 decades without much change in the policies. So that gave, even though it's a very difficult policy regime, some can argue, it was consistent and it stayed the way it was. So industry played up to it, and they managed to create an opportunity out of it. So in the game, they learned their tricks, and the practitioners are no longer in our country. They have migrated to the dark continent, Africa, and the Far East, and they are developing projects in those countries because they gained so much from the limited opportunity. And manufacturing capacity also happened in our country. There's a hydropower turbine company and as well as a wind turbine company, but not very, not doing great. But all these things happen because of that single window of opportunity. So you don't have to think great things from the private sector, but from the government side, you have to do many things, like the resource development program, yeah, measurement of wind resources and even solar resources for the consumption of project developers. That is very, very important, because without bankable resource data, you can't raise finances for your project. So that way, the authority I'm coming from, the Sri Lanka Sustainable Energy Authority, we have a counterpart in your country, SREDA. So they have a lot of homework to do to set the stage right for the private sector investment. Just to give you the icing on the cake, the solar rooftop program. Ours is a land constrained country, just like Bangladesh, very limited space. 20 million of us are living in 65,000 square kilometers, and we have acute land related problems, just like Bangladesh. So we thought of giving an opportunity for solar using the solar rooftop thing. So the first we gave the net metering opportunity, where your electricity is compensated, so there's no buying of electricity by the utility, just compensate your production with your consumption. So that opportunity, you will never believe, it started in 2010, and there was about silence of about 3 years, and after the 4th year, the industry picked up because the solar prices came down, and now we have nearly 150 megawatts of solar rooftop in our country, and 50 megawatts of ground-mounted projects, and there's no end to the explosion of the market. We had 6 companies to start with, and now we have more than 300 startup companies serving the industry, providing 5,000 employment opportunities in the country. So it's again a simple piece of paper. The opportunity, I can count the number of pages, only 16 pages of our hard work managed to create 5,000 employment in the country. So that is the great part of it. And I would like to respond about the India and China thing later or after this. After this.
Thank you. So I'm going to answer your question in 2 parts. The first one is more generically, what does it take for Bangladesh to achieve a successful wind energy program? A successful program can be achieved on the back of 3 things. One is technology innovation. The second one is appropriate commercial business models. And the third one is, how do you achieve cost competitiveness? And the reason I'm saying the third one is most importantly because gas is very cheap, and so your per kilowatt hour price of electricity is fairly low. And so given the economic profile, I think somebody will expect that it will be matched, right? Either it's on par or slightly higher. I can't imagine somebody would pay far higher for it. So that's the first part. What does it take to achieve? The second one is to build in the regional component, which is what is it that Bangladesh can leverage given the context of the region today. And the context is that in the region, Bangladesh has best practices that they can leverage, given successful renewable energy programs that have been adopted and run in the region, one of them being India, but they can pick what works. Like, for example, hydro, you can look at Nepal and Sri Lanka, and you can look at wind and solar for India and things like that. So you have best practices to pick from. Now, the third thing is, of course, is that in each one of these, along the value chain, whether I'm talking of technology or whether I'm talking of new business models, I think it is in their interest to see how is it that they will gain from economies of scale based on investment that's already been done in the region, right? Because Bangladesh does have a tendency in some of their tenders to say that I'd like to buy from Europe instead of buying from somewhere in the region. So it's in their interest to take a case-by-case study of how they would like to achieve all 3.
Harsha, I was just curious, with the development of those regulations, was that government only? Did you involve the private sector in that development? Were there any revisions, or did you get it right the first time?
We never got it right the first time. So always there is a very bad period. End of November, we faced the private sector about the tariff determination and all that. So there are a lot of course corrections made based on the private sector accusations, wild accusations, and there's a lot of fighting, but we emerge as friends thereafter. So that happens annually. It happens.
Are there any more questions? Please.
My question is to Sharmila Barathan. What are the best practices in your view that you mentioned that Bangladesh is going forward with the renewables? And secondly, you mentioned 3 criteria for going forward for this. One is cost competitiveness, and the second is a proper business, well-founded business plan, and the third I missed. You said something.
Yeah. Back on technology innovation.
Oh, technology, okay.
Yeah. So please go ahead.
Yeah, so the best practices, in your view, what are they that contributed so much to the Bangladesh's going forward?
That could contribute to Bangladesh.
No, you said Bangladesh has got good best practices which are propelling it forward in this.
No, okay. So I don't know if that's what I said. I said that, so his question was, Bangladesh is looking at renewables and particularly wind in a big way. And what is it that Bangladesh should be doing as next steps in order to be able to run a successful initiative, program, whatever? So my answer to them is twofold. One is at a generic level, which is that a successful program can be achieved on the back of 3 things. I said technology innovation, appropriate commercial/business models, and the third one was cost competitiveness. The second thing I said, if given that we're all discussing, regional harmony and, how can we harness our complementarities, I said that Bangladesh has existing best practices in the region that they can leverage.
Like?
Yeah, okay. So I said they can turn to learn from Nepal and Sri Lanka on hydro, and then they can learn, so example for wind. For example, I'll tell you, and I haven't looked at the wind resource assessment. Did NREL do a wind resource assessment? Yeah. So I haven't looked at it, but if you're looking at low wind speed regimes, you can look at what are the prototypes that are coming out of India today for low wind speed regimes, but have high efficiency levels, right? And then you can say if they already exist, pick one of them instead of, getting it from somewhere else where it becomes a little more expensive. The second one is initially when India ran the wind program, they ran it on FITs, feed-in tariffs, right? And that is one thing that definitely helped India to actually create a stable and enabling environment for wind to grow. So things like that which they can pick on, and then they can learn from the regional experience.
I got an impression you said Bangladesh have specific policies which are propelling it forward.
Oh, okay. No, his question was, what is it that Bangladesh can do?
If I can add, for Bangladesh, Bangladesh has succeeded in the solar home project. That is where Bangladesh, especially it's an off-grid, and Bangladesh is moving forward in many dimensions, with this commercial and residential rooftop, solar park for megawatt, grid-connected solar IPP, and irrigation pumps to replace the conventional pumps, mini-grid and remote standalone systems, and also solar potential in excess of 2,500 megawatt in the next 4 or 5 years. This is the broader goal for Bangladesh. Thank you.
A clarification on this rooftop. Can I just ask him, you
Please.
mentioned rooftop.
Yes.
Is it an open-ended two-way system, or is it only, how does it, is it commercially two-way from the consumer becomes the supplier when he's got excess, and vice versa?
No, it's not two-way at this moment. That is the plan.
Okay.
That is the plan, but now it's not two-way.
So is it one way already on, working?
One way already on, yeah.
Working?
Yeah, working.
Places like?
Even, no, so government has made it mandatory for giving a minimum percentage of rooftop even in the grid areas.
Which city is it working in?
In Dhaka, even in Dhaka.
Okay.
If you come to Dhaka, you will see in a lot of buildings, you will see solar rooftops.
What percentage of the power is met through that?
It's 5%.
Ongoing?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I would like to respond to this gentleman again. In Sri Lanka also, it was the avoided cost, which is quite a high price for the renewables. It attracted the necessary capital and the entrepreneurship into the industry. Then they were on a feed-in tariff for a brief period of about 5-10 years. Now it has become the competitive investment efficiency kind of evolution. That entire evolution took place within a span of about 20 years, and now we are reaping the benefits of it. So solar rooftops, you are asking Bangladeshis, but in our country, from 2016, the two-way arrangement is available. Earlier, it was only one way. Now it's two-way selling is available on two different schemes.
Two-way commercially working now?
Yeah.
Since 2015?
2016.
16, oh,
yeah.
Very good.
So you can sell at about 15 US cents per kilowatt hour. It's a very good price they have got for the solar rooftops.
Is there a differential to the favor of the rooftop owner, or is the differential in favor of the supplier?
It's favorable in the rooftop owners because we are at the incentive phase of the program right now. So it will, similar to the other programs, we will have the next phase and finally a competitive model for the rooftop sector as well.
And what is the percentage of the power through this system going on now?
Presently, we are managing just little over about 1.5% of the.
This must be Colombo.
The whole country.
Oh,
yeah.
Even small cities.
Yeah, yeah. Not even the large industrial concerns, they have converted their large roofs into because there is a scheme known as the Net Plus scheme, where all your produce can be exported irrespective of your consumption. So it's just like a IPP project. You are selling your entire production and consuming just the way you have been consuming, but your roof is utilized for the power generation purpose.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great, thank you for the questions. Are there any more from the audience? I don't see any from Slido. Remember, I told you I would call on you. Oh, yeah.
So it had been very entertaining experience for us Sri Lankans working with the two countries. But I have no direct experience working with the Chinese, but I have work experience with the Indians. So being very candid about the two countries, it's painfully slow working with India. So the decision making, you will never believe, even we are very slow movers, Sri Lankans, but we get frustrated working with India. You have to be very, very candid about it. And it's inverse with the Chinese. I will just cite you an example. We were given a tender document where it had 600 pages of Chinese evidence on their past success or something like that. They have been told to submit it in the English language, but they submitted it in Chinese language. So we just told them this cannot be done. You have to provide us translations, and we gave them time 1 week. We thought sufficient. You will never believe the 600 pages got translated and landed on my table within about 12 hours. Not even 12 hours, less than 12 hours. I just don't know how. It was the translation was handwritten on a purple-colored pen on the same Chinese documents by a single person. The handwriting can say, how can a man work like that? We don't know. And that pace and the urgency and the sense of duty, we have never ever seen any part of the, not with the Americans, not with the Europeans. I just don't know how they work. And you just can't compete with China. I have to be very frank with you.
Oh, that's great to hear. Any other questions? If not, we will have sort of last thoughts and wrap up the session. Anyone? Well, maybe we'll go in inverse order now. We'll start with Nirjan. And do you have any last final thoughts for the audience on the sort of opportunities where you see the region going?
I know this is the same about renewables, but I think renewables falls within the larger gambit of electricity trade. And whereas there is limited connectivity, there is demand for increased interconnectivity within the region. So, for example, Bangladesh has an interest to invest and also buy electricity from Nepal. We already have the bilateral workings, and now there is some demand to go into trilateral arrangements. And I think this will eventually lead towards an institutional arrangement where hopefully this can turn into a more of a regional pool that we can all benefit from. I think as long as this just becomes, in this report, Asia Foundation came out about a couple of months ago, talks about how the current thinking about a region is always an extension of the Indian system into Nepal, into Bhutan, into Bangladesh. And I think that if there is demand for trilateral arrangements, eventually, hopefully, this will turn into more of a regional pool along with many other international arrangements that are there. I think that is the eventual direction, but I think creating these policy alternatives, having these discussions in forums like this, will slowly push it towards. I don't think it'll happen on its own, but these discussions will help towards it. Thank you.
Yes, I would like to reiterate the necessity to learn from each other. So there are a great many examples. We had a very good program, Sari Energy from USAID. So I came to know the region through that program. So there is a grave need to develop that, especially in the energy efficiency arena. So renewable energy is happening because of the private sector push, but energy efficiency is not happening because it's nobody's baby, so to say. So I think there's a great opportunity to learn from each other, and every one of us have better programs when we compare regionally. India has its wind program, exemplary wind program, and I think rooftop program, none can beat our program. I'm very happy to say that. So the pace of things tells us that. So there are that many things happening in the sector. So I think it's right time to use apparatus like the SAC and the SAC Energy Center, and maybe look at the renewable energy, the vast potential in the region, in regional context, so we can benefit, all of us can benefit from this. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's very important that we are open to learn from each other and work for a greater connectivity among ourselves, because energy security is a common agenda for all of us. And I think renewable energy will play a pivotal role in resolving the energy security. And SARC is a growing region, and I will invite you all to Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a very vibrant economy, and a lot of things are happening. And I'm sure seeing is believing. So please come to Bangladesh. Thank you.
So we believe that regional economic cooperation in renewables offers win-win opportunity for the private sector, and therefore we look forward to forging alliances that drive forward trade, investment, technology cooperation, and knowledge sharing. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Oh, we have a last-minute question.
Yeah, can I just ask this esteemed panel full of expertise on their views on harnessing energy from the oceans, especially the maritime nations? So various ways. So this esteemed panel, very difficult to get them together at one point. So expertise, opinions from and views from each.
All right, so we did have that question early on.
Okay.
But Sri Lanka, did you have anything you'd like to add to it? I think the sort of the summation of that was that it's very interesting. There's a lot of potential, but it's prohibitively expensive at this point. So a lot of research needs to go into it before it becomes commercially viable, and that's the key. Like it has to be able to compete competitively before it's going to have a significant uptake.
Yeah, it's even to run a program, a resource assessment program in ocean energy, it's quite expensive. So we are trying hard to secure financing to conduct a program like that. It's not as easy as solar or wind energy assessment. So even the structures, the involvements and permissions required to erect something on the shore is very, very prohibitive, at least in the context of Sri Lanka. So we have better choices. I mean, better in the sense cheaper solar energy. So it will be next to impossible to compete with the price of solar with the modern technologies. But that doesn't.
I mean solar also on the ocean, not only current
The,
and water, but solar, because land is a big problem in most of the Asian countries. So you have, so I mean that aspect also, not only water and current, but also solar.
Yeah, certainly. We are taking cognizance of those facts. Thank you.
All right, if that's it, then I'll thank you all for attending and thank our panel for the discussion. If you all want to give our panel a hand.
Thank you, everyone. Before we conclude, Akshay, if we can present the, I would request my colleague Veena to do the honors. Akshay, if you could please help Veena. We have some grow tree certificates, and these certificates basically mean that trees will be planted in your name. Now, in these cases, somewhere in East Sikkim.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. So we're very happy. Please, Mr. Nirjan. Please also pose for the pictures, Veena. Yeah, that's better. Yes.
Can you take one more with the lady? Thank you.
Thank you, Akshay, Veena. Now we formally conclude the parallel track. The last of the, we have only a concluding session ahead of this. For this, we request you first to join us for refreshments, which is taking place in the Shah Jahan room, which has been arranged. So please join us in the Shah Jahan room, and there, after the refreshments, we'll have the concluding session, which will mark the end of the connectivity conference. Thank you very much. Thank you all for attending. Thank you.